Good evening, everybody. My name's Kevin Shakespeare. I'm the Vice-Chancellor here at Keele. We are being joined not just by people here in the Westminster Lecture Theatre, but also we had about 400 people registering online, friends from across the world, alumni, our students here from Keele, and a particular call out to Keele University Greece, our colleagues in Athens, who are also joining the debate. One of the things we're keen to do through the debates is encourage disagreement. I think it's really important that universities are places where people come together and disagree with each other and explore the reasons for those disagreements. So my one thing to encourage our fantastic panel that Antonius will introduce in a second, and also to everyone in the audience, is I'm interested in finding the areas where we disagree. And exploring where those disagreements come from, because I think that's where we're going to find the most rich areas to explore in the strategy. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Professor Antonius Raghubansi, who's our Pro-Vice-Chancellor for International, and he's going to introduce the panel.
Thank you, Kevin. It's wonderful to be here, and it's fantastic that this is internationalization is the first theme of the first debate. Just on my immediate left is the Right Honourable Joe Johnson, known to many of you, an influential figure in education policy, having served as Minister of State for Universities, Science, Research and Innovation between 2015 to 2019, and before that as head of the number 10 policy unit. Joe today maintains several distinguished positions across the education system, including as Executive Chairman of Future Learn, and a member of the board of Access Education Group, which is the largest independent provider of further education in the UK. He was the chairman of the House of Lords Special Inquiry into 11 to 16 education, and is a member of the Special Select Committee on Social Mobility. Joe, welcome. Next, Joe, is Vivian Stern, who many of you would know was appointed Chief Executive at Universities UK in 2022. Having previously been Director of Universities UK International, quite well known all over the world for that role. She has over 25 years experience at working in higher education policy and politics at an international level, and was awarded an MBE for services to international education in 2022. Vivian, welcome. On Vivian's left is Professor Adam Habib, who was appointed Vice-Chancellor of SOAS University of London in 2020, arriving from South Africa, where he was Principal and Vice-Chancellor of University of Witwatersrand. If you can speak Afrikaans, you can say that in a different way. And former Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research at University of Johannesburg. Adam's a Professor of Political Science. He has over 30 years of academic research and administrative experience in institutions distinctively defined by engagements in the contest of ideas, their translation into actionable initiatives, and the building of initiatives. Welcome, Adam. On Adam's left is Jessica Turner, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Quacquarelli Simmons, many of you know as QS. QS work with universities to identify and deliver higher education strategies to help institutions reach their goals. Jessica leads QS's global team to deliver insights, advisory solutions for universities and to governments across 80 countries, supporting institutional performance, student recruitment, skills development, and innovation. She has led the expansion of QS through sector partnership and strategic acquisitions. Welcome, Jessica. And at the end is Paul Lovegrove. Paul is CEO, UP Europe, and Chief Operating Officer at Navitas, where he joined Navitas in 2015. Navitas, some of you will know, is a global education company that works with universities, industry partners, and governments to provide international students with pathway programs, English language training, vocational courses, and degree opportunities, helping them to transition into higher education and succeed in their studies across many campuses in many countries. Paul has overall responsibility for establishing new partnerships and overseeing all university partnership operations in Europe. He's responsible for determining the strategic direction of the division, overseeing the quality of delivery, and ensuring a focus on efficiency. Paul oversees Keele University International College in partnership with us here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's have a first round of applause for everyone on the panel. So just very quickly to tell you about the process that we're going to go through. We're going to invite each one of our panelists to speak for a maximum of 8 minutes to explore the areas that they'd like us to think about this evening. As they're speaking, you have QR codes in front of you, and if there's any questions you would like us to pose in the second half, please do get them in early. It's going to be really busy, I think. So an incentive to sort of get your questions in as the panelists are speaking. Online, you can also submit questions there. We're then going to take a short break where you get an opportunity to have a coffee. And myself and Antonius are going to work through the questions and decide which ones we're going to ask our panel. And then in the final hour, we'll pose the questions to the panel. If you're in the audience, we might come to you to ask you to pose your questions, and you can indicate that on the online form. Can I just check everyone's got the QR codes so you know how to do that? So great. I'm going to hand back to you, Antonio, so you can take us through the running order for the panelists.
So we're going to start with Professor Habib, and then we'll come to the Right Honourable Joe Johnson. We'll start there first.
Should I kick off?
Yeah.
So firstly, colleagues, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here with the panel and to have this opportunity to share my thoughts. Colleagues thought that I should kick off partly because I'm probably going to be more critical. But I do want to say that to be critical does not mean one doesn't need to be pragmatic. That it's important to be critical and to speak openly and bluntly. But it's also important to be able to form solutions to the challenges of our time. I do run a university. I've got to make sure that that university is financially sustainable. And many of these things that we're thinking about are issues that we have to grapple with on a daily basis. I am very critical of the UK business model for UK universities and that of most of the US, Australia, Canada, and many of these institutions. I'm critical because I think that the business model is flawed on pedagogical terms. I think it's flawed on moral terms, and I think it's flawed on commercial terms. Just think about it. The whole system functions on effectively overcharging international students and cross-subsidizing domestic students. That's how the system works, at least for the last 12 to 15 years. And I think it's worth saying that pedagogically, if you are serious about looking at the challenges of our time, global challenges, climate change, war, pandemics, you need both global technology and local context to bridge, to train people to address those challenges. And it seems to me that the best way to do that is to think through bringing together universities and curriculums to bring the local and the global in conversation with each other. So pedagogical times, this idea where you go to the Western tree and learn about how to run the world is a model that is long past. Secondly, it seems to me, from the perspective of strategic terms, it's challenging. I mean, when you bring people to London and New York and Berlin to train them, what we do know is the research shows that the vast majority of people don't go back. 85% of Indian students who go out on scholarship never return. That's true 90% of Africa. And that creates all kinds of challenges around how do you distribute skill sets around the world to address the global challenges of our time. Moral, I mean, yes, if you're overcharging students in the middle of Saudi Arabia or the UAE, it's one thing. But when you're overcharging students in the middle of Malawi or the Philippines to cross-subsidize middle-class students in the UK, you've got a real problem. And it seems to me problematically on a commercial front, we've now priced our higher education system completely out of the global marketplace. It costs you to come to SOAS, a humanities and social science degree, £28,000 tuition. It costs you another £20,000 to live and subsist in London. That's £50,000. That knocks out 97% of British society. Forget Africa, forget large parts of Asia, etc. And so there's some serious rethinking that needs to happen around us. This entire business model becomes unraveled because of the politics of a migration. Everybody was onto this. Everybody was happy until the politics of migration became an issue in the UK. And that's when it unraveled. The new business strategy, international education strategy, at its essence, is we need to use education as export, grow from 32 billion to 40 billion, but don't bring them here. Try and keep them overseas. That's the model that's in play. And it seems to me that we've got to start asking whether that's morally viable and commercially viable. There's 4 elements to the new international economic strategy that you can think through. One is campuses overseas. Second is partnerships, both traditional and equitable. Third is online. And fourth is franchise agreements. SOAS is really committed to partnerships, and we are looking at that. We've got now some 8, 9 partnerships which do make money, and I'll come to that in a minute. But the real challenge is we haven't gone for campuses for 2 reasons. One is I do worry about the commercial wisdom of building campuses overseas. I was quite struck by the fact that of the 10 universities that have now moved in India, 5 of them are running at a deficit in the UK. If they think they're going to make their money in India in the short term to cross-subsidize, I think they're very, very deluded about the Indian marketplace and how that thinks through. So I do think we need to think that through. Franchise agreements, I think that there's a place for them, but I worry that if you go into the middle of Dubai and walk around where in some of those campuses, they've got 21, 22-year-olds teaching a curriculum that they've not developed. They don't do any research, and basically you're overcharging domestic students. There's a question about the quality of that program. But there are some fantastic franchise agreements that work. We have 1 or 2 of them with the Ismaili Institute, etc., where there are senior scholars who are teaching. We do franchise agreements, but I do think we need to. Where we actually doing a lot of work is partnerships. And the reason we're looking at partnerships is to try and think a new business model. And the way we've been doing it is kind of joint teaching and joint research. So if you go and partner with selected universities around the world and you do joint teaching, what you really begin to do is drop your costs, because now you're spending half of the labor time teaching because the other half is done by the local institution. When you do that, costs fall. If costs fall, if you play with costs and scale, you can reprice fees. And you can cut fees from what is 28,000 to 12, 13, 14,000, depending on which context you're looking at. And so we've done this in Kazakhstan. We've done it in Bangladesh. We've done it in South Africa. We've done it in Saudi Arabia, although we've charged full price in Saudi Arabia. We've done it in Taiwan. We're looking at Beijing, and we've done it in Bangladesh. So there's about 8 or 9 areas where we've actually been able to break down. At the moment, we make about 3% of our national income, of our institutional income on partnerships, so we're running it at a profit. But we do it openly, we do it transparently, and we share with local institutions any surpluses we have. People understand and recognize we've got challenges. We're quite open about the challenges. But it seems to me that what they also want is they don't want doublespeak. And there's too much of doublespeak in some of the partnership languages that they have. I want to end by 3 quick things. What are the lessons, it seems to me, that comes from our experience? And I want to say this, we've got 3 out of those 4 are active currently, and another 4 will go active in 27. So, in September this year. But there are 4 lessons that I want to put on the table. 1, we make money, about 3%, but we are honest about our challenges and we make it clear and we share surpluses. 2, what is interesting about what we've done is partnerships have really worked in countries where governments have provided scholarships, or other partners have done it. And that's been very, very useful. We haven't been able to break through in an open fee environment. I think that there are places where we can do that, but until now we haven't broken into that. And I think that the one area that we need to think through in an open fee environment is, I think, middle income countries. There is a possibility, India, China, a whole series of places where that is possible. Here's the challenge. In lower income countries, take African countries, I think even if you discount fees and you bring costs down, the price is still not at a point that the local market can afford. And so you have to start thinking through financial arrangements with development banks, with the World Bank, with other agencies that still bring the price to a point where the market needs to. And so I do think We need a fairly nuanced model. I think, and I want to end here. If we think we're going to do partnerships in higher education the way we've always done it, which is simply overcharge international students to cross-subsidize domestic middle-class students in the UK, I think we're seriously morally flawed, but commercially I don't think it's going to work anymore. I think there's too many competitors. And so you need to reimagine the model that reimagines costs, reimagines scale, and in the process creates a win-win that is both aligned to developmental and commercial logics. That's where I'll stop. Thank you.
Over to you, Joe.
Well, good evening, and great to be here at Keele, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel, and great honor to be following Professor Habib, who I've discussed these issues with in the past. And Adam, I was surprised to find myself actually agreeing with a lot of what you said. I do think there is a need to reimagine the model in many, many ways. But I'm not going to skate over the ways in which I do disagree, Adam. And I think we've been invited by the Vice-Chancellor, Kevin, to sort of focus on disagreement and to use this as a forum to explore disagreement. So I'm not going to shy away from doing that. Adam, you used in your remarks just there, I think the word overcharging maybe 4 or 5 times. And I just fundamentally disagree that UK universities, English universities, are overcharging. Say 4 words to you: willing buyer, willing seller. Students are not coerced, right? The title of this debate is exploitation. Intrinsic in the idea of exploitation is coercion, lack of agency, lack of choice. That's simply not the case. The international students who add such enormous value to our system are very sophisticated in their decision-making. They have access to plentiful information. Their decisions are carefully weighed up, often years in advance. They have choice. Britain isn't a monopoly provider of international education. We have stiff competition from countries around the world, not just the 4 or 3 others that you mentioned, sort of US, Canada, Australia, and maybe New Zealand, not those traditional ones, but also now in many other hubs around the world, in the Gulf, in countries like Singapore and Malaysia, also now offering international education. So there isn't a sense in which students are coerced in coming to the UK to undertake their studies. Now, as to overcharging, that implies that they're being fleeced in some way. Well, if that were the case, word of mouth would have ensured that international students didn't want to apply in large numbers to the UK. That's evidently not the case. We have a situation where the UK is, I think, in long-standing position as the 2nd largest destination country for international students. I think the risk, which I'll perhaps come to at the end, is more that we lose that position. So I don't think the revealed behavior, the choices of international students in repeatedly wanting to come and study in the UK suggest they're being overcharged. On the contrary, to my mind, it's a mutually beneficial exchange. Students come here, they receive a world-class higher education, they can stay and work afterwards for a period of time under our graduate route, and then they can go back home if they choose to do that and put their skills, which they've acquired, their human capital, to work in their domestic economy. And that's a mutually beneficial arrangement. I certainly don't think it's exploitation. And I think if they were being overcharged, then that model would have, then this model would have packed up quite some time ago. So I think that's the first point I really want to make, is that students, international students, have agency, and let's not deprive them of that in this whole debate. The second point I would make is that universities also have agency in this debate. If universities genuinely think that they're overcharging and acting immorally, no one's forcing them to do so. International fees are not regulated in the UK. Universities are quite free to set fee levels at any price they want. You don't have to set your PGT, your postgraduate taught degrees, at £28,000. And indeed, many universities in the UK don't set their fees at £28,000. They have postgraduate taught degrees available to learners at far, far lower levels than that. So universities have agency over the fees they charge. when it comes to international students, and they're not regulated by governments. So they are totally in control of that part of the equation. They're also in control of the product they deliver, how they deliver it too. So if universities don't want to have a high-cost model that requires them to price their international degrees at that level, then they can change their model if they think they're acting immorally and if they think they're exploiting their students. They can move to more online delivery, they can move to courses that scale more easily, and moreover, they don't necessarily need to be located bang in the middle of central London in some of the most expensive real estate in the country. You can move and offer your courses in different ways. So students have agency, universities have agency. Now, when it comes to the differential of fees, so why do we charge international students more than domestic fees, and isn't that unfair that there's this cross-subsidy? I would look at it a slightly different way. I would say, actually, I would flip the lens a little bit and say, well, domestic students are being subsidized because they've contributed and their families have contributed towards the UK tax base over time. They've invested significantly in the school system, in the infrastructure, and it's right that they pay a subsidized fee into the cost of their higher education. And similarly, I think it's right that international students pay something closer to the economic cost of providing access to a world-class higher education system that's benefited from massive public investment over many, many years from UK taxpayers. And we apply that principle in many, many different ways, in many different parts of our public services in our state. We apply it in the health service, where it's free at the point of delivery for UK residents, UK people who've been living here for a while. International people passing through the UK have to buy some insurance or pay a levy to access the health service. Similarly, housing, free to people who are resident in the UK, have been paying taxes in the UK. If you were just coming and arriving in the UK, you don't necessarily have access to housing. So there are many ways, many examples in which we differentiate between UK residents and UK taxpayers and non-residents, non-UK taxpayers in how we allow and price public services. And I don't think higher education is necessarily immoral in applying that differentiation in exactly the same way. So that's the third point, is on fees. I think just really trying to be a bit more positive about this. The UK doesn't have many globally competitive industries right now. Higher education, though, is really one of them. It generates about 40-odd billion pounds of economic value for the country every year. It's an industry in which we're second only to the US in terms of our market share. And it's one of our great calling cards on the world stage, the fact that we have these brilliant higher education institutions, this great research and science base that people want to come and invest their human capital in and to come and study at. It's really a fantastic tool of soft power. And I think we need to get behind the international aspect of what our universities do, support internationalization, because it's really one of the few globally competitive sectors that we have at the moment. And I think we all need to row behind it, not undermine it. And that brings me to my final point, which is I think the risk is really not that we think of this as a sector that's exploiting people who are willingly coming to this country or indeed taking degrees from UK universities, offering them in other countries, but that we start to lose this fantastic sector altogether, and that we lose the appeal that we presently have to international students, and that we stop being relevant. So I think that's the real challenge, is how do we reinvent our system so that we're delivering a product and a service at a price which genuinely catches a global market and keeps us relevant in decades ahead, because believe me, we will really miss international students when they're no longer here, if that ever happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. we turn to somebody who is accustomed to refereeing between the sector and the policymakers.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think you can tell these guys have done this before. That was already, that is not bad as a start for a really interesting debate. So thank you both. And I'm going to try and, I said in the preamble when we were talking in the green room that I would go, I thought Adam should kick us off and Joe should go next, because that's just frankly, I would pay to see that debate. And then I would come in and agree with both of them. But I'm also going to try and disagree with both of them in, honour of the spirit of this debate. If I run out of time and forget to say the main thing that I wanted to put on the table, it's this, that my previous job before I ran Universities UK was leading the international function, the UUK International. Some of you have worked with this outfit. And right at the end of my time, I was in that role for 7 years. We had a 2-day sort of retreat with Pro-Vice Chancellors responsible for internationalisation. We talked about all sorts of things. The end of that discussion, over the kind of final kind of few hours, we kept circling back to a question which still bothers me. And it's this. What would your international strategy look like if you didn't have to turn a buck? Right? And I think that's an important question to hold in the back of your mind. And I think it speaks to something that Adam said. I described this as don't pull the wool over your own eyes. And I think you talked about the danger of doublespeak, that when you're setting up a partnership, if you're saying actually this is all about the good of humanity, but actually really it's about filling a hole in your bottom line, then you are kidding yourself. You're somehow, I think falling into a trap that it would be wise for us all to try to avoid, because it eventually catches you out. And I think that's a question it's still worth us pondering, right? But I also believe very strongly, having drunk deeply of the Kool-Aid, but also having travelled around the world. I've had the enormous honour of going to many countries where there is a really strong appreciation of the link between access to outstanding higher education and opportunity at a personal level and a national level. The sort of a thing that I think we lose so easily in an advanced economy, this sort of sense that education is the way out of poverty, and being privileged to be in conversations with people who can see that there is a win-win here. Then, no illusions that the UK has become, extremely global in its reach in the provision of higher education, both onshore and through transnational education. That we're not doing this, no matter what some people will say, purely out of a kind of altruistic drive. There is a need in the UK to engage in this activity, and I'll come back to the point that Joe made about the drivers of that in a second. But there's a win-win here at the individual level and at the national level. And that win-win, I think, is really important. It's important not to lose sight of that. We're so lucky in the UK to host a set of global institutions, right? You go to the great universities, and Keele would be, it would be as true here as it would be in any of the institutions I've visited in the last sort of 4 or 5 months. You've got a highly internationalized staff population. You'll have students from probably 150 countries on campus. You are the universities you are because you're global academic communities. And we are fantastically lucky to be the hosts of those global academic communities. But they're producing benefits which don't just accrue to the UK. They do accrue to the UK in very many ways, as Joe said. I mean, of course, economically, but also in terms of the way that the UK, this network of rich relationships that we have around the world. But they also accrue to those people who forge their academic careers here in what is fundamentally still a great research environment, who get access to professional networks. I go and talk to international students on quite a frequent basis. In fact, I talked to some of your international students today. And, the opportunity to be exposed to a kind of educational environment as rich as the environment you find in many campuses, learn alongside people from all over the world in a higher education system, which I think we can be really, really proud of. That's not, that's not exploiting somebody. Now, the costs are very high, and here's where I'm going to disagree with Joe, right? I think we've been driven as a university system too far towards reliance on international fee income to subsidise domestic education and research. And in that point, I absolutely agree with Adam, right? This should be the cherry on the cake, not the flower, right? And we have been driven into that position, I believe, by this sort of an unenviable choice, which I think largely we've been presented with by policymakers. And I kind of exclude Joe from this because I think you did try and winkle out, well, you succeeded in winkling out at least one increase in the domestic undergraduate tuition fee. We're underfunding domestic education, we're underfunding domestic research, and the way that we have sustained the quality of our provision in the UK, as with many other advanced economies, is by expanding our international operation, frankly. And it's also driven universities to drive up fees. And frankly, my strong view is that's a major error. It's an error at the kind of grand national strategy level, that we should be able to sustain domestic education and research at a level which we can be genuinely proud of, such that this remains a strategic asset to the UK, and we should not be overly exposed to the inevitable vulnerabilities that come from both contested domestic politics and geostrategic vulnerabilities. That's unwise, and we need to find a way in the next decade or two to unwind that overdependence, as do many other systems. I probably better stop talking, but I'm just checking. Have I disagreed with both of you? Because if not, then I should. I think I haven't disagreed with you, Adam. Have I not disagreed with you? I guess here's the thing I would pick to disagree with. I always enjoy listening to you. You, though, charged us with operating a pedagogical model that was sort of basically neo-colonialist, that people come to the UK to learn how to run the world. I don't see that. I think that's nonsense. And so there you go. That's my service to the... There we go. Thank you.
Yeah. Just to remind you, the QR code's up there. Please do scan and start submitting your questions. We'll go down to that side of the panel now, and we have a more global perspective. And Jessica first, and then Paul. Jessica sees the whole global education system. She has that chance, but it's not just the QS rankings.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. And it's such an honor to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. QS is an organization that has global universities and international education at its core. We were founded 36 years ago with the mission that we enable motivated people all around the world to fulfill their potential through education achievement, international mobility, and career development. So this is very close to the heart of what we've been doing for a very, very long time. And I think in this debate, I agree with many of the comments that the panelists have made. I absolutely agree that the UK has been spending years exporting education, and it has served UK institutions well because of that funding deficit and the ability to therefore supplement the cost of teaching domestic students and producing that very high quality research. However, I think that this isn't a sustainable strategy for the next decade, and really what our institutions and our government particularly, and this is on a local level as well as on a national level, need to be doing is really putting international education and the global university at the heart of UK economic and trade policy, because I think that the UK has a real comparative advantage, as we talked about, in the higher education sector. It's been built up over decades. We have the ability to attract top talent, to attract investment, the students or the researchers, the industry partners, and to use that talent to power up our economies and deliver growth through our industrial strategy, as well as to deliver growth to other economies around the world in those partnerships. And I think that at the moment we're facing in the UK a really difficult situation. We've got stagnant growth, we've got increased unemployment, we've got very strong competition from international universities, and therefore the call to take a much more proactive stance about the links that the UK can form across the world for top talent, I think is really pressing. So, a few things that really support that. Firstly, today's internationally mobile student is very discerning. They're not just looking for an education at an institution with a great reputation. They need to be equipped with future skills for jobs that may not exist. The UK had really benefited from being part of the Big Four, attracting students, and demand from international students is remaining really robust. I mean, we're predicting that we're going to continue with 3.9% growth in this sector, which, over the last few years, through pandemics, through global crises, through wars, has been one of the most resilient international sectors. And if that continues to be the case, then we'll have 8.5 million students studying internationally in 2030. About 900,000 of those, we're predicting in our models, are going to be coming to the UK. With more and more students coming internationally into that sector, because you've got countries like India, where the aspiration to have a gross enrollment rate of 50% means that they need to be building 2,500 new universities between now and 2035, and that is something that is attracting international branch campuses from the UK and from many other countries, but that demand is continuing. However, students are very different now, I think, from the students that we've counselled about 1 million Indian students, actually helping them to find courses over the last number of years. Now, students are looking for understanding the career pathways they're going to have coming out of their education, understanding what work placements and access to industry experience, understanding teaching quality, and using really hard metrics to be able to understand those things. So the thought that you would have an education from a prestigious institution and that was where you would get your ROI, that equation has really shifted. So I think for any institution who was exploiting students and not providing that really high quality education, it's always been a short-term strategy. That's even more so now. We talked a little bit also about the competition globally for those internationally mobile students. And universities all over the world are mirroring what the UK has provided for many, many years. Top UK universities, as Vivian said, are a global community with a global reputation, teaching that's informed by world-leading research, with access to global employers. Last week, I was in Malaysia in a country that is attracting and really trying hard to make sure it's the destination for Chinese students, for Asian students, for Middle East students. I was at a university that's a top 500 university in the world, absolutely stunning facilities, 99.8% employment rate, work-integrated learning for every student, and they had global partnerships that those students could participate in with top US, UK, and Australian universities and industry partners. Now that looks a lot like what we're promising to students all over the world, and actually if universities in India, universities in Malaysia, universities in the Middle East are actually better at providing that, the UK sector needs to ensure that it is really, staying really on top and not resting on the reputation, for the long term. We've seen, huge changes in India, particularly. 5 years ago, the national education policy in India was launched. The Indian government was reasonably passive to start off with, but is now, 5 years later, welcoming international universities because of the confidence of the domestic universities that actually bringing international campuses into India is going to help to raise standard for all institutions. There's really that confidence to compete on the global stage with industry partners in India who are providing skills and employability for graduates, really that competes with the idea of a higher investment for students to go into an international education. So I think that universities around the world are taking really seriously what they can do to attract the best global talent, the best industry partners, and students and researchers. And it's very, very important, I think, therefore, that for any university in the UK who's providing that experience, it's not just exporting education, it's providing the skills that are needed not just for a student who might be staying in the UK, but also for a student who's going back to their home country or to a third country to be able to take the jobs that are there, not just now, but in the future. And I think some of the stats that we look at, when we look at, for example, the UK universities that are in the top 500 globally, 10 years ago, there were 51 institutions in the UK in the top 500 in the world. It's now 46. And we've seen that just erode slowly over time. And I think that universities in the UK need to really benefit from and want the global footprint as much as universities around the world. So, what is it that the UK therefore needs to do? I think not relying on a historical reputation for excellence to sustain the model that education is an export, both from students coming to the UK and T&E expanding at scale, but really higher education needs to be the focus and the core of the UK's trade and growth agenda, attracting top global talent and investment in conjunction with university partners and governments. We've recently done an analysis of the UK's industrial strategy across the 8 priority growth sectors and have just published a report where we mapped the 1,900 occupations across the UK and identified 1,400 of those which are roles that are critical to the government's priority growth sectors. And 80% of those roles that are critical to the growth sectors for the economy require at least a degree level qualification, a bachelor's, a master's, a doctoral level. So universities are absolutely central to building that skills pipeline needed for long-term growth, not just here, but in other countries around the world as well. And that needs to be really understood in our popular discourse. It's not about funding universities and whether or not we can supplement deficits for universities. It's absolutely central to the long-term growth prospects, I think, for the UK. That industrial strategy is not going to be achieved with a focus just on technical education. And as well as that, when we look, just as a final point, we analyse the impact that AI will have across roles in the UK. We look at how AI is going to be augmenting jobs as well as how AI is going to be automating jobs. But we've seen in the analysis that when we look at the 33 million jobs in the UK, that about 50% greater economic impact comes from that augmentation, from making people more effective using AI than the automation, which is going to reduce the level of employment that's needed. And that could actually add up to 3% to our economic growth across the UK. So if we expand graduate skills in the key growth industries, we make really effective use of AI in our university sector, then we could significantly accelerate the GDP growth of this country. Many countries around the world, the university systems are at the heart of that AI development. They're really building AI into the way that the universities operate, the experience of every student, and preparing students for those long-term jobs. Is the UK doing that enough? And just one closing reflection. I was in India 2 weeks ago. We had a large summit, our QS India summit, with government and stakeholders in India and university leaders from India and from around the world. And we found that we were delighted to host the Indian High Commissioner for the UK there, who joined us in Goa for 2 days to work with the universities in the UK, to work with the Indian universities to really understand how the education can be core to the UK and India's bilateral trade agreement. But But our High Commissioner was not alone. We actually had High Commissioners there from Australia, New Zealand, Austria, Ireland, and Canada. And the fact that all of those countries felt that the higher education and trade was so intimately linked together that they really wanted to invest in those relationships between universities really is something quite new in the way that we've seen the evolution of thinking about international higher education. And I think that, you know, that's where the UK needs to stay in front and think not about, you know, being exploitative or being an export sector, but really thinking about how do we build on this historic advantage that we have with this brilliant higher education sector to be a way of utilising talent from around the world, from the UK, to really support not just the economic success of the UK, but to address some of the global challenges around the world as well. And I think we need to do that before it's too late. Thank you.
And Paul gets to disagree with the entire panel.
Yes,
and Navitas was doing branch campuses long before they became popular and was dealing with risks long before it became such a big issue.
Yeah, and I have the disadvantage of going last, so pretty much everything that I think I could or could be said has already been said, and I have the advantage of having I can reflect on the debate as well, which is a really nice position to be in. I think my first position is, like, as a fundamental thing, I think internationalisation is a force for good. That's my fundamental position. And I feel that personally, I feel that with people that I know who've been involved in studying abroad, getting cultural experience from being in different educational systems, of students that I've seen come over to the UK and have transformational experiences, of being involved in setting up campuses overseas where governments have wanted to try to bring a sense of a different way of being able to educate their people. All of those things, I think, are forces for good. So I thought I'd offer a slightly different approach and look at this through three different lenses. So I think the first lens is it's not static. So I've been involved in higher education for 30 years. I was a teacher, and 30 years ago, I taught Nigerian students who wanted to do law in Brighton. That's what I did. And there was no China market. No students came from China. There were no managed campuses. There was no T&E. There were flows of students coming from Southeast Asia that was impacted by a series of big challenges in the 1990s. And I think if anyone had sat there 30 years ago and explained what the fabric and structure of internationalisation looks like today, I don't think anyone would have believed them. And that will be true in 30 years' time. What we're dealing with is a current state of affairs in which people are trying to operate and trying to, I think, still see that internationalisation is a force for good. And the changes that we're seeing now are quite profound. So even if you were to take China, which has for a long time been the country that has the largest global flow of internationalisation, has entirely shifted in the last 5 years, unrecognisably. So whereas many Chinese students would come out of China to study abroad, they now have net inflows of students going into China. There are more T&E operations from Chinese universities outside of China than there are foreign universities going inside China. And that's happened in the space of about five or 6 years. And I think what's really important to take from that is that, for me, it's not a question of whether or not internationalisation is a good thing to do, and whether or not you can find ways of getting the true value of it without some of the downsides that we talked about in a little bit more detail today. It's about how you imagine what it's going to look like and where we place ourselves. And I think all of the points I would agree with about the importance of the role that the UK can play in the... I don't think we get to shape the future, by the way. I think we've got to react to what's happening. And that leads to my second point, which I think was kind of referenced by colleagues on the panel as well. Partly it's driven by the operating model of UK universities in the UK. And I really support and agree with Vivian's line, which is, it is not healthy to be over-dependent on internationalisations as an economic model. It just isn't. And you only need to look at the state the universities are in today over the last 5 years, where having come through COVID and having migration policy, which was incredibly accommodating for a period of time, with huge flows of students coming in and the money that follows, and then banking on that for the next 5 or 10 years, only to have that rug taken away, has led to behaviour which I think exploitative might be too strong, but there is no doubt that there are decisions made about students, international students and domestic students, which are driven by the force of that operating model. I don't think anybody wants to be in the situation that they're in, but the levers that universities have in order to operate, I think, are very limited. So it doesn't surprise me at all that the desire to want to continue an agenda for internationalisation and trying to be as effective as you can within an operating model which really works against you from every conceivable angle. So you have no ability really to set fees for domestic students. Most of your costs are fixed and going up and becoming more expensive. The government reduces the number of international students that you can get, even if it does allow you to be able to charge at a higher rate. And this is the very interesting thing that's happening at the moment. So I do believe that, and I do believe that we are coming out of an environment where in that operating model, universities have had to try to subsidise domestic provision with international students. I think in the next 5 years that won't be possible, not because of regulation, but because it's becoming very expensive to live in the UK, and it's very, very expensive. And you'll find that most universities at the moment, in order to attract international students, are having to reduce their fees. They're having to discount, provide scholarships, and to do things which are actually bringing much closer, I think, domestic fees with international fees, and that's not within design. That's not a strategic objective that has been designed and is flowing through. The last sort of lens I put on it is that my personal view is that global international education exists as a thing because of demand and supply disequilibrium around the world. So if most of the countries where students are coming from to, say, study here at Keele, they're coming from countries where they cannot access the level and quality of education in their own country that they can over here. So there is a level of demand that is unsatisfied by a level of supply locally. And only two things can happen. Either your students have enough money to go abroad, or you try to attract in and build your own capability of being able to provide that in a local context. I think what you see is that different countries have different approaches to how they try to grapple with the challenge that they have of losing their talent. But again, it goes back to my first point. It changes over time. So China was a net exporter of students and is now a net importer. If you look at the journey of the way that China has engaged itself in higher education strategy, it is going to be in a position where it will not need to be able to do what it's done for the last 15 or 20 years. And if you look at other emerging economies that are doing something similar, that will happen there too. It's happening a bit in Malaysia, it's happening in Singapore, it's happening in Dubai, and it will happen in India as well. So for me, I think it's about understanding the context of where we are, and that context will change, being true to the sense of what internationalization brings, and trying to navigate the very challenging operating models that I think can sometimes lead to decision-making which may not be seen as being for the right reasons.
Good conclusion. Great. Well, thank you very much to all the panel for a fantastic contribution to the debate. We are now going to take a break until 7:15, and then we're going to have 45 minutes where we can pose questions and extend the debate. Now, I'm just wondering, how are we doing for questions? Do we need to encourage more? No, that's a very worried look. So I'm afraid last orders have now closed. Please enjoy the refreshments, and we'll see you back in 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we now go into the question and answer part. Myself and Antonius are going to call people to ask their questions, or we're going to read out the questions. So if you said you were happy for your name to be stated, we'll say your name. If you said you were happy to be on the mic, we'll come to you. and ask you to pose the question. If you said you want to be anonymous, we won't say your name. And then it's obviously online and we'll read it out. Just a message to the panel. We're going to try and give some time for you to ask each other some questions as well. So probably the last 10 minutes or so, we might ask you to ask each other some questions coming out from the first half. So we're going to start with the first question, which is in the room. It's on the mic to build the suspense up in the room. I am famously terrible at pronouncing people's names, so I'm going to mess this one up. But Peter Kazowitz. Peter, are you here? And how badly did I pronounce your name?
It's all right.
I'll take that as very badly. That's fine. Thank you very much. Do you want to ask your question?
My question is, we focus a lot on the international students and how we may be exploiting them. But I sort of think it's the opposite way around, where in the future, maybe we would be exploiting ourselves by focusing internationally. Since we're in a cost of living crisis, who knows what will happen in 20 years when our economy is not in the best of shapes. I don't know why exporting British institutions will help grow our own domestically. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vivian, sorry, I'm coming to you first.
No, fine. This is a really interesting question. I mean, I've kind of, I've thought a bit about that problem myself. I haven't quite kind of arrived at it the way that you have, but we've got a situation where you've got universities that they do have deep local roots, right? They're very, very place. They're very connected to the places that they belong. But you sometimes talk to leadership teams, and you can sort of tell that if it weren't for that, if you were a car manufacturer, you'd up sticks and move to, I don't know, probably the Middle East or maybe South Asia. I'm not sure that this looks like, oh my God, please, if there's a journalist in the room, please do not. I always forget. But, if we were another sort of industry, I think the government would be asking, how do we make sure that you build your future here? That you put your time and energy and intellectual effort and investment, because universities invest in the UK. You look, all the building, the sort of jobs that are created, I'd want that to be happening here. That's not at all the way government thinks about us. What a smart question.
Yeah. And I'm going to come to Adam for a second response.
So, it seems to me that there's 2 or 3 issues that are worth saying. Firstly, where do we all agree? UK universities are a great set of institutions, and they've made a fantastic contribution. Second, internationalization, you made the point, is a force for good. I have no doubt about that. The question we have to ask is, how do you do internationalization? That's the real debate. So let me tell you why I think the business model is broken. Basically, we overcharge international students to cross-subsidize our universities. But we also get tuition paid, students who pay tuition to cross-subsidize 40% of research of academics. So we've got people who are being charged a tuition fee to underwrite 40% of the time of the research time of academics. Is that a fair model? And I think that that's not fair from domestic students' perspective or international students' perspective. I do think we need a different business model to do that. Now, here's where I disagree with Joe. Do we all have agency? Yes. Is our agency unconstrained? No. That's the history of the UK. Markets operate, but you also regulate markets. For me, the real debate is about how do we create a model that allows us to fulfill what every one of us in our university says. Look at every mission of every university. We say higher education is a public good. Well, if it is a public good, which it is, by the way, that doesn't mean we don't pay. We will have to pay something, because if you're going to have 50%, you have to look at it. But what is an appropriate mix that allows you? That's the question that it seems to me we should be asking. And so what I'm asking for is, should universities be rooted in our local context? The answer is yes. But the UK can't operate as an island. We live in a world where all of our challenges are transnational. Pandemics, war, food security, renewable energy. We have to start operating in a manner that is nuanced, that speaks to our context, that allows us to achieve the challenges of our local community, but simultaneously sees us as good citizens of the world, in which we can partner other institutions of the world to address the challenges of their societies. Because if they can't deal with climate change, or they can't deal with pandemics, then what that's going to do eventually is come to haunt us in the UK. That's the challenge we have. And how are we both as institutions, both global and local? And how do we bring that together in alignment with each other? That's the fundamental challenge of the university. And we need a business model that figures that out. And part of it, the role has to be played for by university vice chancellors like Kevin and myself. But part of it requires some sensible stewardship from government. Not different departments saying completely different things and having the most fractured public policy you can ever have in any part of the world. That's our problem. And we need to bring those two things in alignment with each other.
Thank you very much. Peter, do you mind if I come back to you? Is your concern that by exporting this great higher education system that we have in the UK, we're creating our own future competitors? And your worry is that they will outcompete because we've taught people in other parts of the world. Is that sort of the heart of one of your concerns?
I think in a sense, yeah, that's correct. But I would think that by the time that already takes place, we would be already out the market because the economy isn't doing currently too well, and it would only get worse. And once we fall behind, there wouldn't be any way of getting back up. I think soft power was mentioned earlier, but that's ephemeral. It's not particularly real in any economic terms that would be important on the global scale.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. I think we'll go on to another question.
Yes, we have lots and lots of questions online as well as in the room, but we'll go to one more in the room. Alex Asbury-Paddock, if you're here, Alex. If you could just stick your hand up and...
Just
Alex, yeah. Okay, great.
Thank you very much. So my question is, we've had a lot of talk about tyranny and things like that, and how maybe it's exploitative or not equitable. So my question sort of forms around what I view, obviously as vested interest, but as a more equitable form of internationalisation. So I just wanted to ask the panel, to what extent does the panel see exchange and mobility as a way forward for UK institutions, and as sort of a part two for that, what do they see for other sectors of the UK benefiting from internationalisation through exchange and mobility as well? Thank you.
Can we go to Jessica and then we'll come to Joe after Jessica?
Yeah, no, certainly. I mean, I think it's a really good question because I think that we are in a competitive global world. I don't think that there's any way that we can, preserve what we have and not realise that universities, researchers, companies around the world are all improving what they're doing, and therefore the more that we can expose the students who are in the UK, the researchers who are here in the UK, the companies who are industry partners to the skills, the talent, the practices in other places in the world through that collaboration, then the better. That's where we all benefit from being able to incorporate what's best in other places. And I mean, to go back to the example of India, one of the things that is so often talked about there is that India is great at frugal innovation. They talk about, always the example of, in India, it costs them $100 million to send, a rocket ship into space. Whereas in the US, it costs $100 million to make a movie about sending somebody into space, right? If you want to get something done really effectively, really efficiently, go to a place where the whole culture is about how do you do things really effectively and really efficiently in a very frugal, cost-effective way. Let's take the best of that in an exchange back into the things that we do, which makes our research better, that makes our own skills development and practice better, that then means that people are able to be better prepared to be citizens in a world where the economic advantage is more uncertain in the future.
Thank you, Jessica. Joe?
I think the question was about TNE and mobility. I think TNE is a really interesting development. The UK is performing really strongly in TNE. It's about taking UK universities' qualifications and delivering them closer to learners in their own markets. And I think that's a really positive development. It lowers the cost of providing education. It makes it more accessible. You're going to reach a different strata of student who's not necessarily as wealthy as the student who can come and study in the UK. So it addresses some of the challenges that Adam was throwing out about the old model of student mobility, where students from the global south came to the global north in a high-cost model. So I think it's strongly to be encouraged, and I'm supportive of the international education strategy in that respect. I don't think it's going to be an El Dorado for institutions who are undertaking it, and there might be some over-optimism on the part of some institutions about how easy they're going to find it to compete in different markets around the world. So I think we're on a very fast learning curve in that respect, and we'll see how well those who are rushing to set up in countries like India will fare in due course. But overall, I think it's a positive development. It's certainly a model which has lots going for it in terms of lowering the price point and reaching learners who are kind of priced out of coming to the UK. I think we've got to remember that the globally mobile student population in the traditional form is only about 2.5% of the total number of students in higher education. So we've got about just under 300 million students studying in higher education around the world, and we have about 7 or 8 million who are shifting from one country to another in order to do so. But being able to access and bring high-quality education to the 98%, the 97% who aren't moving around, I think that's something which is really interesting, and I'm very supportive of all universities who are thinking hard about how to do that.
And sorry, just before you come in, Vivian, just to follow up on that, what about short-term exchange? Yeah, short-term exchange. Look, I think Britain has been very poor at taking advantage of short-term study opportunities. We didn't make much use of Erasmus, which is why, at the end of the day, the Treasury felt it was, back in a few years ago, felt it wasn't value for money. That viewpoint has now been reversed. So we've got to ensure that we do take advantage of these schemes, that universities enroll and participate, and also that we continue touring, which has a broader reach than Erasmus and gets people to other parts of the world where capacity was constrained under the old Erasmus rules. But there is a real problem in our system of barriers to people taking up those short-term study opportunities, people who see financial barriers, who see caring barriers, who see credit transfer barriers. So there are a lot of barriers to short-term mobility which we still need to address to take full advantage of the opportunities they bring. Thank you, Joe. Vivian, you want to come in?
I was really going to make the same point Joseph made, that the UK students are spectacularly immobile, and we should be doing a lot more to encourage outward mobility, because we know that students benefit from that. But I think at a national level also, I was at an event recently with the British ambassador to China, and a lot of the discussion, I mean, Joe wrote a brilliant pamphlet about this a while ago. A lot of the kind of discussion was about how we can enhance our ability to understand and engage with China in an age in which that's surely going to shape all sorts of things about, the way that our national story plays out, language ability, understanding of culture, understanding of sort of different ways of approaching big questions. We should be hopping up and down and pushing government to really support the drive to get more students to go abroad? And if you haven't, I mean, you look like you might be a student, are you?
Not too long ago, I did graduate 2 years ago. Thank you.
Okay, right, it's not too late.
I think Adam wanted to make a comment on this.
I wanted to say that, surprisingly, I agree with Joe completely. I think that transnational mobility, student mobility is important. I think us as universities going out into transnational education, taking and creating opportunities for the millions that can't afford to come to the UK makes a lot of sense. I think where we need to learn is how we do it and how we go about it. And one of the things that, coming back to something, is I think we oversell what we can. We do a lot of double speak, and it loses us credibility. You know, in all of the partnerships I go out to build, and we've done these 8, I started by saying, look, I want to be honest with you. I've got a series of cost structures I have to cover. I have to cover that. I'm telling you up front. Now, can we create a model in which I can cover our cost structures, and you can also share in some of that, and can we create a business model that works in it? A large number of executives of universities in the global south will appreciate the honesty, because their problem is exactly your problem. And that's what I think we need to think through. And I don't think UK universities, and broadly others, are thinking enough about how we can partner together. We've got incredible capacities, and we've got surplus capacity to train. How do we couple that with systems that have less capacity and make it a win-win agenda? That is where I think the real debate is. Not that we should do it, but how do we do it? How do we think it through? That nuance is what we've lost. And I think we could learn a lot if we were just slightly more pragmatic, a little bit more humble, and a realization that other systems also have capacities. And that's something that we could all learn from.
Okay, let's move online. We had over 400 people registered, so we want to get some questions from the online audience. Paul, I'm going to come to you first on this, and Vivian, I'm going to come to you second, but then it's open to the rest of the panel. So the question comes from Emma Price, and the question is, at a time when the UK's messaging around international students can feel conflicted, how can institutions ensure that international students experience a genuine sense of welcome and belonging, not just as fee payers, but as valued members of the academic community?
It's a great question, and it's not easy to do that in the context of what it's like for an international student trying to come and study in the UK at this present moment in time. And I think any of us that are involved at the sharp end of decisions on visa grounds which are just beyond logic of reason, of students that have spent a lot of time choosing to come to the UK, have got their money together, have followed all the rules and regulations. And I think for those of us that are kind of operate very much in that world, there is no doubt that we don't want to have anything that compromises the quality and the genuine desire for those students to want to study in the UK. So for their first experience to be that, I think is a challenge that we all have to try to overcome. I think it's the same focus and attention. I mean, our organisation has its roots back we're an Australian company, and we started back in 1996, and our founder had a very simple idea, and he saw that there were students coming into Australia for the first time, first country really to open up internationalisation, and students from Indonesia and Malaysia, and they were failing. And he just had a really simple idea that it wasn't to do with their capability, it was to do with the way that they actually had a bridging program, and the way that they would, the differences in culture of where they come from, the difference in their education system, I don't know how many of you have children, but my 2 kids, one's just finishing university, one's just starting university. to conceive that one of my children may land in Beijing, not speaking much Chinese, be picked up in a taxi to study at Beijing University, this is what most of the students that come to the UK are facing. And I think all of the elements of respecting that and respecting the choice and the difficulty of that choice, and to build that into support and to have a consistent voice. And I think actually, if I'm honest, I think the UK's always been very good. And I remember the days, particularly when Vivian was involved in the international side. Just rewind the clock back to COVID times. There was a period of time where the UK was all over the place in its position on COVID. And it was really detrimental. We were going to have a massive issue. And the sector got together as a whole and said, this is what we're going to do. And that was enough. And even though it was hard and it was difficult, students then wanted to come that very year that COVID happened. So I think as a sector, there is a real DNA for being able to do that. And I think that's heard. I don't think there's any university out there at the moment that is not sending positive messages for students who are really struggling with our visa regime to actually access UK education at this present moment in time. The more we do that, the more we bother to care about their individual stories of where they've come from and what that might be like if we were, or our children were in that situation. And I think we've always been good at that.
Yeah, thank you. Vivian.
I think it's another great question. I think it is something that kind of, again, it sort of bothers me. That COVID moment was really, there were so many things about that were just fabulous. I mean, despite how awful that period was, this sense that a whole bunch of people got together and go, right, what problem do we have to deal with today to smooth the path of international students or help them while they're here? So we did crazy things. Like we were chartering flights. We were busing students from airports to their accommodation and then supporting them through the quarantine period with food packages and laundry services and prescription deliveries. We were, there was a massive food bank in East London, which suddenly saw a huge increase in the number of international students because they couldn't work. And a lot of international students need to be able to work in the kind of the service economy in order to part fund that. And so, hey presto, when all of those jobs disappeared, there were international students in the UK who were destitute. And I think that for people like me, there's a real danger that you slip into kind of policy world in which these are not real people anymore. They're kind of an economic model. And I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of the real people who often have made, I think one of the things that's rather humbling about international students is, you get all these politicians, not Joe, you get politicians who sort of treat international students with this sort of skepticism. You're here trying to kind of take something away from us and we don't really trust you. But, often the stories of those people, there'll be many generations of the family investing in that opportunity for that student to go. And we should do a better job of explaining that, we should have much greater respect for the colossal investment that international students make when they choose to come and study with us. And I think those people who think we don't do a good enough job of hammering home the message, these are real life individuals, and we should be really proud, and we should really challenge ourselves to look after them while we're here. You should just keep flicking us about that because you're right.
Yep.
Thank you.
We'll switch to another online question. This one is from Anonymous. They didn't want to name themselves. One of the panel members said that education has the power to bring people out of poverty earlier. Most middle-class families in Asia won't be able to afford international fees for UK universities. And even if these courses are only available to well-off non-UK families, how is that going to bring people out of poverty? And I think we would want to start with Adam on that one.
So it seems to me, and this is where I do think, if our agenda is to enable, I think education is a significant platform on which to enable economic development, inclusion, and economic social mobility. I think the research is quite clear on that. It seems to me that the real question is, how do you enable access for a wider range of people than simply the rich or those on scholarships? And I think this is where internationalization becomes the possibility. And for me, what drives me on this is how to think of a business model to drop the cost. And because if you can get that, then you start allowing wider and wider layers of people to enable access to that. And part of that is a very, very pragmatic set of questions. Our salary structures are high by the very nature of where we're located. So if you want to think through bringing down the cost, and a large percentage of every university's cost structures is tied to salaries, if you deploy that for smaller periods of time and you partner that teaching with somebody else, you drop the cost. If you drop the cost, you can drop the fees. If you play with scale, instead of 15 students, you have 25 students in a class, you can open up this. And it's simple, fairly pragmatic, business logic, commercial logic models you can establish through transnational educational opportunities, bringing the cost down. And I think that that's important. There's another challenge that I just want to put onto the table, which is, for me, what is interesting. You raised early on, do I think students come here to learn a colonial model? The answer is no. What I do think people come here is because they want to access a global marketplace. So why does somebody, UCT is in the top 120 in the world. Why is it that somebody would leave UCT and come to an institution that's number 450 in the UK? Because they want a British degree. Why do they want that British degree, even though that UCT is higher? Well, because you can get a job in London. Why do you can get a job in London? Because you earn in pounds, and pounds is 20 times the rand. Yeah. It's a very, very simple, pragmatic decision because of the nature of inequality in the global order. That's why they do it. And that's why people make the choices. That's why family generations are investing so much, because if somebody comes here, they become the instrument by which social mobility happens for everybody. And so we need to think that through as part of the logic, and how do we compensate for it? Because if we simply accelerate that, you'll suck people out of the developing world. And the real consequences of that in the long term is you'll suck out talent. Think about medicine. How many doctors leave? And these universities in the global south are scrambling to train doctors because as much as they train them, they're leaving. How do we address that transnational challenge? Because the next pandemic comes, there's not enough doctors in those parts of the world to this extent. Those are global challenges in which we need honest, nuanced public policy conversation. And we have too little of that, it seems to me.
Jessica, do you want to come in on this one?
Well, I think one of the models we haven't talked about as much really is online. And I think the combination of online degrees from UK universities, really coupled with the experience that goes with short exchange, means that we can potentially have much more access in a way that then, and those models are really long established. You've got institutions in the UK who've been providing that breadth of education for many, many years. And I think that, we've just got to balance the various factors. And I think, we'll see. It's interesting that, when you look at the way that the sector's evolving, it hasn't all moved online, which, a number of years ago we thought, well, actually that would be potentially one of the ways that international education would evolve. I think that's because people want the human experience. They want to be getting that cultural experience, etc. They potentially want the access. But I think now far more of the joint degree programs, which are 2+2 or a 1+3 or even a 0+4, programs which allow people to be able to live at home and live in their country and study. A lot of that, I think, is what's going to change and evolve international education over the next few years.
Thank you. Conscious of time?
Yeah. Let's go to one last question in the room. We haven't got a surname for this, but it was D. Is D here? D, thank you very much. Would you like to pose your question, please?
Thank you. The question is, the issue is not African countries are charged more rather than European countries or the UK are not necessarily interested in developing these nations in terms of competition. And it was their choice to come here. However, the local people themselves are overcharged, even though the learning system are far beyond industry. I believe education is overrated, where you can be self-taught, provided that you are disciplined.
Thank you very much. Anybody want to have a go at that one?
What's the point of the university question?
We'll go Vivian and then Paul. Maybe you'll have a shot at
So,
that.
I fundamentally agree. Like, often I get involved in a kind of slightly depressing argument about, there being too many people who go to university and it all being a rip-off and it's not worth it anymore. And I think your fundamental point, which is that it's perfectly possible to be successful without having access to higher education. And there are people who've got real grit and drive, and they can be autodidacts. They absolutely can. And especially in an age in which the access to information is no longer a barrier. There are people. Now, most of us, I think, struggle to curate a curriculum in the way that you have access to when you go into a university. I mean, I think it would have been very hard for me to do the thing that I did when I was studying. I studied English literature. It was total, most people would say it was a total waste of time. I liked it. I'm also gainfully employed. But I think it would have been very hard for me to go on that kind of journey without somebody kind of, helping me to understand how to begin to build a skill set that would allow me to go from, a shallow level of understanding to a much deeper level of understanding. I'm certain it would be impossible in subjects where you need kit and equipment and labs. You couldn't really be a self-trained vet. But I don't think we should put ourselves in a position where we ever could be accused of arguing it's the only way to be successful. I don't know whether that addresses the whole of your question. I've kind of seized on the last bit of it, but I hope you'll forgive me for just doing that.
I'd like to, because you don't have to come here to be successful in life.
Yeah.
You can hands-on and get things done.
Yeah.
But I think that the good thing about that is that's the challenge to every university. You have to provide an education and experience that is actually giving people something that is different from what they could get by themselves using ChatGPT, talking to friends, etc., and or even a short course that's provided by an employer or a certificate course. You have to be able to provide something that's differentiated, and therefore, if you think about what are the things that students are going to need and lifelong learners are going to need to be successful over the next generations, when the jobs that they're doing now may go away, they may be changing jobs multiple times. You need critical thinking skills. You need great communication skills, both verbal communication, written communication. You need the ability to really engage with people. You can benefit from having a really deep sort of disciplinary focus that allows you to figure out how to learn. And you can do that in a multidisciplinary environment. And you think about, we started this debate with talking about Keele and what Keele is here for. A lot of those elements were really embedded in the university experience that we've talked about. So if you're providing something that's very different from an online lecture that somebody's viewing in their bedroom, which therefore you could have got in many places, then hopefully that's something that's worth students investing their time, their resources, and their families' resources in many cases.
Great. I'm going to come to Adam, but before I do that, can I just remind the panel, the next thing we're going to do is ask you if you've got any questions you want to ask each other. So just ponder that, and we'll come to Adam.
So I just wanted to say, can somebody be successful without going through the university? The answer is yes. We've got tons of examples of that. But I do think universities, and I agree with much of what you said, but I do think universities are not simply places where you learn in the classroom. They are places where you navigate an ecosystem, where you learn from other students, where you come to a complex environment. I mean, what was a life-changing experience for me as a young student was when I went to study in New York. And for the first time, I left South Africa, studying in New York. and I met students from 50 other countries in the world in my class. And suddenly I realized for the first time, astonishingly, that South Africa was not the center of the world. That the only struggle in the world was not the anti-apartheid struggle. That people were fighting, and that simple realization and being able to navigate the experiences of everybody else fundamentally changed my life. Universities do that and more so now than ever before. And don't underestimate how much you learn from sitting in that cafeteria or on the playground or just navigating relationships on a day-to-day basis from people who don't look like you, who don't play like you, who don't think like you, because that navigation sets you up on how to navigate a more cosmopolitan world. And if there's anything that's happening, this world is becoming more integrated, whatever the politicians would like to wish. And we're going to have to learn how to navigate each other. And if anything universities do, it allows us to navigate with other human beings.
Okay, so to close, anything the panel would like to ask each other, or any final points you'd like to make? I'm going to come in on one, and then I'll come to Vivian, if that's okay. And it was to Joe. So Joe, our lives online become dominated by a small number of apps or companies that come to dominate the global market. Are we doing enough as the UK to make sure that we command the market that we should have online internationally?
No, I mean, UK higher education punches well above its weight in the traditional mode of delivery, but we're well underweight in terms of our share of mind in the online space. I mean, Keele has obviously got loads of degrees online through a third party, and there are many other examples across the sector, but in aggregate, it's still very small scale. And the UK's voice is really being drowned out by institutions from other countries. There are exceptions. University of London, Open University, are doing important work. But overall, we are, a decade behind where our competitors are.
Vivian.
I think I'd like to ask a kind of provocative question, I suppose. Jessica, you were talking about the fact that 10 years ago there were 51 universities in the UK who were in the top 500, and today there are 46. If you cast your mind 20 years hence, what's your prediction?
I really hope that there are 60 universities, 70 universities, because I think that there's so much potential in the UK. I just think that UK institutions, we will, these are quite long-term trends. The metrics that are embedded, play out over a number of years. And I think unless it's something that universities really grasp, that we're in an international world, we need to compete on an international stage, and therefore we have to want to be absolutely the preferred provider of excellent research, excellent teaching, more than anybody else in the world wants it. I think it's about hunger.
Can I respond?
Yeah, go for it, Adam.
I actually think it's going to go the opposite way. Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, I don't think it's because of, and I don't think our universities will be any weaker. I just think that the amount of investment that is going into universities in other societies makes the UK pale into insignificance. The amount of money that China is throwing into its institutions, just the last 15, 20 years, is astonishingly, and at the end, however good you are, if your government is not prepared to support you, if your society is not prepared to build your institutions and see it as part of one sector in a collective, if you like, continuum to grow that, you're just going to be floundering. That's the challenge that it seems to be. And it's not only China, it's Japan, India, as its economy grows, as its GDP starts taking off, it's going to get involved. It's Brazil, it's Mexico, it's all of these places. As they emerge, that's the challenge. What I would like to see is, instead of getting into a never-ending race, the trick is, how can we harness the skill sets of those institutions with the skill sets of our institutions and partner into a transnational agenda of learning, research, and education that makes this a win-win. And that's the real opportunity that I think we should be thinking through.
Do you want to have a final word?
I really agree, and I think it's a good thing that there will be fewer UK universities in the Global 500, and partly that's because what we're trying to do when we engage in transnational education is to help improve universities, and some people may have issue with that, but it is what most countries are trying to achieve when they are trying to attract in. And therefore, if you look at Malaysia as a very good example, where Malaysia has more universities in the top 500 now than it did 20 years ago. And that's partly due to the approach that it took on trying to understand how to build capability in a higher education infrastructure that we've been doing for 800 years. And I also think that the Global 500 QS ranking won't be as important, and I'm sorry to say that to you, but in 20 years as it is today.
Thank you very much for that. We just ended with a note of disagreement, perhaps, there on that. So in a second, I'm going to ask you all to thank the fantastic panel for this evening. But I just want to say a little bit of a word about what happens next. So what we're doing at the moment is using these debates within Keele to stimulate thought about the future of our university. We have a process that's very open. So I just wanted to remind all staff that anyone can submit ideas that will be considered for the new strategy. Those ideas will go through an open peer review process. That's not just academics, that's all of our different job families and everyone in the family within Keele. And we will be publishing those ideas to give a permanent record of what Keele was thinking at this time and how it led to our new strategy. So we've had 70 ideas in already in about 3 weeks. I think we're going to have hundreds coming in, and I'm absolutely delighted with the response that we're getting. To our alumni and to our students, we will be coming out to you and holding specific events where we want to get your views on the future of Keele. So thank you to everyone who's helping me and helping everyone build that future. The final thing I wanted to say before we thank the panel is about the next debate, which is coming in on the screen, which is local lives versus global goals. Should Keele focus on the region or the wider world? We have a fantastic panel in for that. That's next week. And then we have a little bit of a gap, and they're spaced out, the future debates. So I hope you're able to come and join us. We're up at the Denise Coates Foundation, very appropriately, up at the business school. So thank you very much to everybody. We couldn't get through a small fraction of the questions. There were over 50, which is fantastic. But I'd like you now just to thank our fantastic panel. Thank you.